with Raphael being like Kevin and Peter being a little bit like Donatello. And so now Mirage Studios was fully up and running and the comic book was doing really well. But it was about to explode in popularity in many different ways, which would take it so much further than being just a comic book. And the man mainly responsible for all this was a Mr. Mark Friedman. So, as I said, the comic book was doing really well, and it wasn't long before Kevin and Peter started to receive lots of calls from licensing agents who wanted to represent them and turn Kevin and Peter's creation into a toy line. But for one reason or another, Kevin and Peter were never really won over by this, and no deal was ever made. That is until they met licensing agent Mark Friedman. Now, Mark Freeman had instantly fell in love with the concept of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and he fought really hard to work for Kevin and Peter and bring the Turtles into the mainstream. Mark wanted a 5-year deal, but Kevin and Peter were reluctant, so they gave him 30 days to go out and bring back an offer that they couldn't refuse. And as I said, Mark really saw the potential of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and really wanted to work for them, so he accepted the offer. So Kevin and Peter sent Mark out with only 2 things to seal the deal. They gave him the very first issue of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comic book with a note attached to it which read, "Go out and make me $1 million or else," along with a 4-foot foam replica of a Ninja Turtle. And off he went to make the deal of his life. But Mark soon discovered that it wasn't going to be that easy. Problem was, everyone seemed to think that the concept was laughable, that it was ridiculous. They didn't see the potential in the Ninja Turtles. Mark was turned away time and time again. No one understood the idea of the Turtles, and they didn't seem to realise how good it could be. But nevertheless, Mark persevered and tried all he could to get some kind of deal for Peter and Kevin. And of course his trying paid off when a company called Playmates Toys decided to take on board the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and produce a toy line that would definitely turn their company around. But even at this point, Playmates still had to pitch the idea to the big bosses. Another problem that stood in the way was how violent the original comic book was, so they needed to make some tweaks here and there and then present their pitch. Unfortunately, the pitch did not go well. They just couldn't seem to convince people that they were onto a winner. And so it was then decided, in order to sell these toys, it might be a good idea to have some kind of animated TV show to create a backstory for the Ninja Turtles, to cover an origin story, but without the violence and the adult tones that the comic book had, and to get this show on TV sets for kids to see whilst they ate their breakfast on a Saturday morning. And after all, it worked for He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, which was originally a toy line that really needed a TV show to help sell the toys. And funnily enough, the guy who actually designed the He-Man toys worked on the Ninja Turtles as well, and he actually took over from some older designs that Playmates had come up with and instantly made them better. And so eventually a deal was made, and Playmates decided to pay for the cartoon to be made, and they produced the first 10 action figures, which were Leonardo, Michelangelo, Donatello, Raphael, Splinter, April, Shredder, Bebop, Rocksteady, and a lone foot soldier. And it wasn't long before the TV series found its way onto the television sets in front of kids on Saturday morning. But still, even though the cartoon was out there, Playmates still found it hard to sell to the actual retailers. You see, no one wanted to take a chance on the toys because they just seemed too ridiculous. That is until Toys R Us took a chance and ordered a shipment of the figures. And it would seem that the staff at Toys R Us could not get these figures on the shelves quick enough. As soon as these figures hit the shelves, they just sold. They sold like hotcakes. And of course it wasn't long before Toys R Us ordered more, and this time the order was considerably bigger. Turtle Mania had truly begun. The cartoon was on every child's TV set and it was bringing in great ratings, so it absolutely dominated kids' TV. The action figure line was selling almost too fast to meet demand, and the next logical step was to design new characters, new vehicles and accessories, clothing, backpacks, lunchboxes, you name it, they did it. Now, I actually have a personal story to tell you. I actually have a very, very early memory of this. I must have only been 6 or 7 at the time. And I remember my parents had bought me Michelangelo, Donatello and Leonardo action figures, but they couldn't get hold of Raphael. And Raphael was my favourite turtle. He still is my favourite turtle. And I remember one day my dad found out that a local toy shop near us had gotten a fresh order in of the Ninja Turtle action figures. And we got our coats on and headed to town. Now, to this day, I remember this vividly. We arrived at the toy shop and walked to the Ninja Turtle aisle. and it was absolutely mental. The staff didn't even bother to put the toys out on the shelves. They just ripped the tops off the boxes, which had multiple Ninja Turtle action figures inside, and just left them out on the floor because they just couldn't get them on the shelves quick enough. And all the customers just dove in. Now, I remember seeing all these adults just snatching and grabbing at the figures, just trying to snatch them up. I think it must have been around Christmas time. I think Christmas was just around the corner. Anyway, I ran over to the boxes and my dad pulled out a Raphael figure and handed it to me. And to this day, I swear I can still feel how happy it made me to get that figure. That's what the Turtles meant to me and every other kid at that time. And eventually, I got all the others as well, apart from Krang, Bebop and Rocksteady. I always wanted them and I never actually got those figures. I eventually got the Party Wagon. I eventually got the Blimp. And all my other toys, the He-Man and the Ghostbusters toys, were all pushed to one side for a while, and these toys created some of my fondest childhood memories. Now, another memory I have, I actually remember people selling the bootleg versions of the Ninja Turtles just right out there on the street across the road from the shop, and they looked more or less the same, but the quality and the colour was a little off. Now, I remember a relative actually bought me a set of all 4 of the knockoff Turtles for Christmas, and I actually used these as the imposter Turtles, like evil clone version of the Turtles, and they would fight my original Playmates versions. I just had so much fun with them. And I, of course, like everyone else, I absolutely adored the cartoon. I watched the cartoon every chance I could get. Whenever it was on TV, I was there in front of the TV watching it. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the cartoon TV series now before we go any further. So, from the moment the cartoon actually begins, as a child, you know it's something special. The theme tune, for starters, was still, and probably is, one of the most catchy, recognisable TV intros ever produced for a kids' TV show, rivaling Thundercats, He-Man and Transformers and any other popular TV show you can think of. And you know, to this day, if I actually hear that theme tune, I can't help but sing along. Now, here's a bit of trivia for you. The gentleman who was actually responsible for coming up with the theme tune for the Ninja Turtles, the guy who actually wrote it, and I think he actually sung it, was a man named Chuck Lorre. Now, if that name sounds familiar to you, well, that's probably because Chuck Lorre is actually responsible for some of the biggest TV shows we've had. These include Grace Under Fire, Sybil, 2.5 Men, and probably his biggest hit of all time, The Big Bang Theory. And it's not only the theme tune that is amazing, the animation in the actual intro is really high standard, it's fluid and it's beautiful to watch. And this is also true about the first 5 episodes that aired in 1987. Now, the 5 initial episodes that we got to sell the toys, they always seemed to me to be animated to a much higher standard than the episodes that would follow. Or so it seemed to me anyway. The animation and the shading just looked superior in some way to the later seasons. This may be due to the animation director who worked on these initial 5 episodes, and I don't think he was brought back to do the rest of the cartoons. The gentleman's name was, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, I know, but I'll give it a go, Yoshikatsu Kazai. And I presume he was given a decent budget for the initial 5 episodes, and that's why they came out looking so sweet. Now, as the series went on, for the most part, the characters were voiced by the following. Leonardo was voiced by Cam Clarke, Donatello by Barry Gordon, Michelangelo by Townsend Coleman, Raphael by Rob Paulson, who would also go on to voice Donatello in the 2012 CGI animated series. Splinter was voiced by Peter Renaday, April by Renee Jacobs, Shredder by James Avery, who was Uncle Phil from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and Krang by Pat Fraley. The show aired on December the 28th, 1987. The TV show needed to be changed considerably from the original dark and gritty comics to be more child-friendly. One of the big changes that was made was to the Turtles. Instead of them being violent and dark, the Turtles needed to have slightly different personalities. They become more comedic, silly and wacky. They started to use more catchphrases like cowabunga, turtle power, radical, tubular, and so on. And they also developed a fascination with pizza, which wasn't in the original comics. And the same also applied for other characters. Take Shredder, for instance. He was still the bad guy, he was still evil, but he was nowhere near the same character as he was in the comic. April was no longer a lab assistant. I think I mentioned that earlier. In the original comic run, she was a lab assistant who worked for Baxter Stockman. In this, she was now a reporter for Channel 6 News. And another big change was Master Splinter's backstory. It differed massively from the comic books. And as I mentioned before, Splinter's origin story in the 1987 cartoon is the one that I actually prefer. So let me just walk you through the first couple of episodes of the Ninja Turtles cartoon. The first episode starts with April O'Neil reporting on crimes in the city that seem to be committed by groups of ninjas. When April finishes her report, she is confronted by a gang of thugs and chased into the sewers of all places. Luckily for her, she is saved by the Ninja Turtles that make easy work of the thugs from the shadows. When the fight is over, April asks her heroes to step into the light, and they do so. And when the Turtles are fully revealed for the first time, we can see a few differences compared to the comics. First of all, they look more easy in the eye, almost cute I suppose compared to the comic books. Here's a few of the main changes that were made. First of all, they all had initials written onto the belt buckles as supposed to tell them apart. And then there's the Turtles' bandanas, the masks. As I said in the comics, they were all red, but in this new cartoon version, they had all been given a coloured bandana and elbow and knee pads. This was done so children could tell them apart. And I suppose to sell more toys, you can't have 4 Ninja Turtles that all look the same because they just won't sell. But if you put a different coloured headband on each turtle figure, then you have to have a collection of each one. So I'm sure, as you all know, Leonardo wore blue, Mikey wore orange, Donnie wore purple, and Raphael stayed in the red colour. Now back to the story. April faints, and the Turtles take her back to their lair. When she awakes, she meets Splinter, and he begins to tell her the origin story. Now in the comics, Splinter was a pet rat before he was mutated, and belonged to Hamato Yoshi, his owner. Now in the cartoon version, Splinter is Hamato Yoshi. There's no Tang Shen, and there's no Oroko Nagi. There's just Hamato Yoshi and Oroko Saki, who is of course the Shredder. Now Hamato Yoshi and Oroko Saki are both members of the ninja clan The Foot, which operated in Japan. Now, in the cartoon, Hamato Yoshi was actually a teacher of the Foot Clan, and Oroko Saki Shredder was insanely jealous of him, and he wanted nothing more but to get rid of Hamato Yoshi. So one day, when the Grand Master paid a visit, all members of the clan were expected to bow before their master and show respect. But just before Hamato Yoshi was supposed to bow, Oroko Saki made his move and pinned the back of Yoshi's robes to the wall with a dagger. When Yoshi failed to bow, it was seen as an insult. And then when he pulled the dagger out from the wall, it looked as though Yoshi planned to kill the master of the clan and was thrown out, and he fled to New York, where he lived in the sewers as a homeless man, among the rats. One day, a young boy was walking past on street level and dropped his ball of baby turtles down the drain, and Yoshi found them and cared for them. Meanwhile in Japan, Oroko Saki, the Shredder, had taken over the Foot Clan and used them for his own criminal interests. Back in New York, Splinter awoke one day to find the Turtles crawling around in purple goo, a mutagen. No canister in this version, it just appeared from a sewer pipe. Now, because the Turtles had last been in contact with Yoshi, the Turtles became half human, half turtle. But Splinter had last been in contact with the rats, so this made him half man, half rat. And then the story goes on to tell how he named them from his Renaissance painter's art book, and he taught them all ninjutsu. And that is the origin story of the cartoon in a nutshell. Now, as the cartoon went on, we discovered that Saki had come to New York and was now known as the Shredder. We saw the creation of Bebop and Rocksteady, and we were also introduced to Krang, the alien brain with a face from Dimension X, who it was seen was Shredder's boss. Now, there was actually a similar version of Krang which was in the original comic books, but it wasn't actually as one character, but as a race of Krangs. And these were like alien brain-like creatures called Utroms. Back to the cartoon, Krang needs Shredder to build him a body so he can move about more freely and become an actual weapon. The body Shredder builds is a massive Frankenstein monster-like creation. In fact, they actually parody "It's Alive" line from the movie. Now, when it comes to the actual body that Shredder builds, it's very strange to look at. The best way I can describe it is blubbery. Krang is placed into a compartment in the stomach where he can control the body, and he also has the ability to grow massively. And I also believe that Peter and Kevin actually hated the design of this Krang body. They actually hated it so much, but it was too late. It was already animated and put into the show. Rocksteady and Bebop were also introduced into the 5-part mini-season. Two of the original thugs at the beginning in episode 1 who attacked April, and they were later mutated into a warthog and a rhino to help fight the turtles, although they were not the smartest villains in the world, often messing up and making mistakes. Now, Bebop and Rocksteady were not originally in the comic books, although it was Peter Laird who created the characters especially for the TV series, and it wouldn't be long before we would see Bebop and Rocksteady actually join the comic books and become fan favourites. Now, as far as Shredder, we have covered his origin story in the original comic and cartoon, but what about the Shredder's